On January 24, 2022, a 43-year-old woman reported to the police that she had been attacked by a man, whom she fortunately managed to escape. In her statement, she mentioned that a certain person had called her via social networks and offered her a job. However, when she arrived, she soon realized it was a trap, as the man mistreated her and also extorted money from her. Thanks to her statement, the police were able to arrest the suspect and uncover one of the worst criminals in the country, who had committed a series of heinous crimes that had long tormented the residents of neighboring houses in the city of El Alto. The whole world learned about the hidden identity behind the fake profiles. His name is Richard Choque Flores, a 33-year-old man believed to have over 70 victims. After his arrest, however, an even more disturbing truth came to light involving many more accomplices who supported Richard's actions. The media scandal that spread across the country and the world also angered the Bolivian public. Richard Choque Flores was born on November 9, 1988, in the city of El Alto, in the Pedro Domingo Murillo province of the La Paz department in Bolivia. As a child, he lived with his father, a policeman, his mother, a teacher, and his sister. He had a very ordinary childhood. Often, he could be seen coming and going in the company of his mother. Especially his mother appeared to them as an unfriendly person with whom they preferred not to speak anymore. When Richard was just 4 years old, his father was killed at work, and the family lost an important person. The trauma of his father's death began to manifest in the boy's strange behavior, which his mother could not control. Richard had practically no friends, and on weekends he sometimes visited one of his paternal cousins. The young man was named Fidel and was several years younger than him. When Richard spent time with Fidel, everything seemed to go smoothly. As a teenager, he attended a military academy but did not stay there long. It is not known why he decided to drop out of his studies. When he returned to his family's home, where he lived with his mother and sister under one roof, Richard showed some strange personality traits behind closed doors. But this had not yet worried anyone outside his family, at least until his cousin Fidel said he also wanted to study at a military academy. This turned out to be an opportunity for Richard, who had little experience in this field, to help him with the application. The young man promised his aunt and cousin that he would take care of the physical preparation so that Fidel could go to college smoothly, and that he would also prepare the necessary documents. For this purpose, his aunt gave him the sum of $5,000 to cover his tuition and expenses. On May 19, 2011, Fidel said goodbye to his mother and left his home with great enthusiasm to fulfill his dream. He met his cousin Richard in El Alto to travel together to Cochabamba, where the college was located. This was the last day Fidel and his mother spoke. Richard took the receiver and told her, at the urging of his aunt, who asked for a conversation with her son Bart, that Fidel was learning parachuting in Haiti and that he was doing well. He used this occasion to ask her to send him money and computer equipment so that Fidel could continue his studies. This whole situation was extremely suspicious, but the concern grew when Richard Choque Flores's face appeared in the national media in connection with the terrible crime he was accused of. On the afternoon of November 22, 2013, a girl named Blanca Rubili Ma went to the State University in El Alto, where she had been studying Jura for the past 2 years, as she had done every day. But on that day, Blanca did not return home. No one had any idea of her whereabouts until her mother Nancy received the worst news she could have expected the next day. From Blanca's mobile phone came the message that her daughter had been kidnapped, and that she would have to pay a ransom of $20,000 for her return. Moreover, the criminal warned her that he would kill her daughter if she informed the police. Nancy was desperate because it was impossible to raise such a sum, as she could not bear the pain of losing her daughter and wanted to give up. She turned to the Special Unit for Crime Fighting for help and began an intensive search for the girl. The authorities found out that Blanca had been contacted via social networks by a man named Mauricio Tiran, who claimed to be an instructor at a military academy. He convinced her to meet him to offer his help with her application for a study program. The search operation lasted about 9 days until the authorities, in collaboration with Nancy, implemented their plan. They told the kidnapper that they had left money in a hiding place on the street to save Blanca. When the man appeared at the spot where he thought the $20,000 would be, the police arrested him. It turned out that he had faked his real identity. It turned out to be the 25-year-old Richard Chalk Flores. The investigators wasted no time and searched the house where the young man lived. When they arrived, their hope of finding Blanca alive was shattered. On November 29th, the girl's body was found buried in a blue jute sack in a grave. In the house, they also found several other women's IDs and even underwear. Because of these discoveries and the murders of Blanca, Richard Chalk was sent to prison, where he awaited his trial, which would lead to a conviction. Based on the results of the autopsy of Blanca's body, it was determined that the girl had died of suffocation and had been hit on the head with an object that caused a skull injury. But to make matters worse, she had been brutally attacked by her assailant before she died. After this brutal crime, Richard Chalk Flores was sentenced in 2015 to the maximum penalty of life imprisonment, which meant that he would have to spend 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole or house arrest. When his aunt, Fidelis's mother, learned on television of the crime her nephew had committed, her doubts and suspicions regarding her son's absence grew, and she began to visit him in prison, pleading with him to tell her where Fidel was, whom she had last seen in 2011. Faced with Richard's desperate silence, the woman decided to name him as a suspect in the young man's disappearance. However, instead of benefiting from this action, she only managed to provoke the anger of her nephew and his close relatives, who not only forbade her to visit him, but also followed her and threatened to kill her daughter, forcing the woman to leave the city and abandon the case for her own defense. In the meantime, Richard Chalk was sent to prison, where he was supposed to spend 30 years, which unfortunately did not happen. As Richard sat behind bars, the people of Bolivia, and especially the proud El Alto, were spared the pain that the premature loss of Blanca had left in their lives for several years. However, on May 17, 2021, the city was shocked again by another disappearance. The story involves a 17-year-old girl, Lucy Maya Ramirez, who left her home that day and was never heard from again. She had disappeared until her mother received a message the next day demanding a ransom of $7,000 for Lucy, or she would be killed if the payment was not made. Along with the terrible message, the girl's family received a series of explicit photos showing what would happen to her if they did not transfer the money. The family had no way of raising such an amount. The same incident happened again a few months later. It was August 27, 2021, when 15-year-old Iris Maine Wilker did not return home. As in Lucy's case, the perpetrator demanded $7,000 to return her safe and sound. At the same time, the police continued to receive reports of women who had been victims of violence by a man who had deceived them with job promises via social networks. But the insatiable monster waiting for them on site had planned a completely different fate for them. Until finally, in early 2022, one of the victims managed to unmask him. On January 24th, law enforcement authorities arrested one of Bolivia's most dangerous criminals, none other than Richard Chalk Flores, in a hotel. How could it happen that a criminal who was supposed to serve his sentence in prison was released and committed crimes again? The investigation that followed this case revealed the ineffectiveness and corruption of the justice system that should have ensured the safety of the victims, thereby arousing the anger of the population. The second arrest of Richard Chalk Flores sparked controversy, as police officers and healthcare workers were punished for complicity with the offender. A new investigation revealed that Richard, who had been in prison for only 6 years for the murder of young Blanca Ruby Limachi, was released on probation by a judge on December 24, 2019, even though he was not entitled to it. His lawyers found a way to change this situation. They did not choose a legal strategy, but the path of corruption. They unscrupulously argued that Richard Chalk Flores suffered from diseases that threatened his life in prison and that it would be better to keep him in a safe place. Dr. Freddie Time issued a false certificate to the defendant, diagnosing him with the following diseases. For this reason, he recommended a special medical treatment diet to prevent stomach cancer. 3 days later, just before Christmas, Judge Raphael Alcon responded to the request of Richard Chork's lawyers, who, in addition to handing over a certificate, gave him $3,000 and a bottle of whiskey as a bribe to think about the matter. Thus, Richard Flores was prematurely released on December 24, 2019. He returned to the house he shared with his mother and sister in El Alto and managed to reoffend, which satisfied him greatly. From his probation until his second arrest, Richard inflicted harm on at least 77 girls, including sexual violence and murder. The way he did this highlighted the vulnerability of the security forces. Once Richard returned to his comfortable place, he unleashed his method to catch new victims. Although he sometimes changed the scenes and the identity he presented, he followed the same script in all cases, leading him to contact his victim. Richard created fake social media profiles in which he pretended to be a police officer or a woman named Hyde MZ. Sometimes he posted job ads. In these cases, he used the profile of Hyde Mitza and thus gained the trust of other women. Richard exploited their financial vulnerability and posted an offer as an escort, stating that girls who wanted a good daily income in their spare time should write to him in private messages. The payment for services was hourly or daily. These posts were located in a group where people in the city of La Paz were looking for work. Other victims were invited by the alleged assistant to courier services, but when they arrived at the place they had been called to, they were shocked to find that a trap had been set for them. Similarly, he behaved with his police profile by placing suspicious substances in the rooms where women stayed, which led Richard to meet them in uniform, making them believe he was a member of the crime-fighting unit. In all cases, he ordered his victims to record a video addressed to their relatives, asking them to give him a certain amount of money. If they did not comply, he forced them to have sex with him and threatened to send them to prison for possession of controlled substances. When investigators discovered his method, they immediately linked him to the disappearance of the minors Iris and Lucy in 2021, wasted no time investigating the case, and prioritized it in this direction. The authorities met with Richard Chor to tell him the truth. Without resistance, the criminal admitted that he had indeed kidnapped and killed them. Security forces immediately went to his house, where a search was initiated, and the bodies of both girls were discovered. To everyone's surprise, they found something else. His cousin Fidel, who had been missing since 2011 and also had the misfortune of falling into his clutches, was buried in his yard, as his aunt suspected. As more than 70 complaints against him revealed, Richard Choc Flores was one of the most dangerous criminals in Bolivian history. Psychological and psychiatric examinations have shown that Richard has the typical personality of an asocial psychopath, lacking empathy, remorse, and a high recidivism rate for crimes. These are the characteristics that were identified during his first arrest, and that the judge ignored when he was released in 2019. Richard Choc Flores was sent back to prison and sentenced to the maximum penalty under Bolivian criminal law of 30 years for rape, extortion, and murder. As the investigation progressed and more truth came to light, the anger of the people grew. When it became known that Richard's mother and sister were accomplices in covering up his crimes, the neighbors did not have to wait long. They went to the house where the women still lived and made their resistance to their family clear by painting graffiti on the walls and even setting part of the house on fire. Moreover, on January 31st, just 1 week after the arrest, a mass procession took place through the streets of Bolivia, from the criminal's house to the courthouse, led by women expressing their resistance to male violence and corruption in the judiciary. Thousands marched, chanting that this would never have happened if he had not been released. One of the slogans they gathered around and made demands was the slogan that there is no justice for the poor, referring to the bribes received by government officials. These demonstrations took place in several cities across the country to demand judicial reform to regulate and guarantee the enforcement of sentences. Currently, Richard Choc Flores is serving his sentence, as are his accomplices, under the watchful eyes of a people who do not forget. Jerry could have grown up to be an ordinary guy if his mom had raised him, but unfortunately, Mom wanted a girl, so Jerry barely had a chance. Jerome Henry Brutos was a devoted family man who didn't drink, didn't smoke, and used virtually no obscenities. But there was a strange secret in his life: his love for high-heeled women's shoes. Jerome Henry Brutos was born on January 31, 1939, in Webster, South Dakota. When he was born, the country hadn't yet recovered from the Great Depression. Jerome's father moved with his family to Oregon in search of a better life, but unfortunately, there were not many jobs there, so the family often had to move from place to place. At some point, Brutos managed to find a job and worked tirelessly in 2 places at the same time. The boys were at home with their mother at that time. The woman treated her sons differently. She worshipped the older Larry, but she did not like the younger Jerry. In her eyes, he was not the sweetest child. She was frustrated that her youngest son did not live up to her expectations and was not born a girl. When the boy was about 5 years old, he was already left to himself. No one was particularly involved in his upbringing. Jerry often went outside and wandered for hours through the neighborhood. One day he came across a magical thing called high-heeled shoes. His mother wore the simplest shoes with flat soles, and the boy did not even suspect that there was something more graceful and sophisticated in the world. Jerry was thrilled with his find. He took the shoes out of the garbage heap and brought them home. There he tried them on his feet and started walking around the room. His mother saw him and screamed that shoes were unsuitable for boys. She took them away and tossed them demonstratively in the trash can. The woman was angry and outraged about these shoes for a long time, and the little boy could not understand what was causing his mother such a violent reaction. Jerry waited until his mother left, then he took the shoes out of the bucket and hid them safely. He carried them around the house if no one was there. But it was not long before one caught him again. The mother screamed even louder, then she grabbed his treasure, carried it to the yard, and lit the shoes on fire. The boy watched in tears as the flames devoured his shoes. The woman constantly read him a moral lesson on how not to take things out of the garbage if you throw them away. While the fire burned, Jerry looked and experienced mixed feelings. On the one hand, dislike towards his mother. On the other hand, a strange excitement, and this terrible mixture created a very strong fetish in the guy. In 1955, when Jerry was 15 years old, a family with several teenage girls moved into the house next door. The guy came up with a new hobby: to spy on his young neighbors through the window. One day he noticed while watching washed clothes on a rope in the neighboring yard. Jerry sneaked up on them unnoticed, hiding behind the duvet, and then quietly pulled off the underwear of the women. He still looted washed clothes many times, and it got to the point that neighbors called the police and complained about missing underwear. Then, Jerry realized why the police officers came and decided to use this to his advantage. The next day, when one of the daughters was alone in the neighbor's house, Jerry knocked on their door and pretended to be a police officer. The girl had further questions about the missing underwear, of course. The girl recognized her clumsy neighbor, but she was interested in what he had come up with and decided to play with him. Jerry asked the girl to come to his house to talk about the theft. When the neighbor appeared on the porch, the guy was beside himself with overwhelming importance. He led the girl into his room and quickly jumped out the door, put on a mask, and returned in the form of a bandit with a knife in his hand. The teenager waved a gun and forced the frightened girl to undress completely. Then he took a camera and took several pictures of the unclothed neighbor in different poses. As he did not know what to do next, he just ran out the door. After taking the mask off his face, Jerry entered his room a few moments later as if nothing had happened. He told his neighbor, who hastily put on her dress, that a masked stranger had locked him in a barn. The girl was all ashamed of how stupid she was deceived, so she just ran away and never reported the attack. It was a very exciting moment for Jerome. He felt his strength in keeping his neighbor under his control. As a trophy, he also left him with authentic photos that he could look at for hours. The following situation happened in the spring of 1956. Jerry Brutos was 16 years old. He lured his classmates to a ride in his private car. The girl agreed, thinking that was a pretty final offer. She was expecting, like her neighbor, no trick of the quiet young man, Jerry Brutos, in whose soul already raged indecent fantasies, drove through the city, then drove the car to the outskirts of the city and drove into a small forest. He pulled out a knife that he had previously hidden and ordered the girl to undress under the threat of death. The classmate did not resist, but pushed the guy silently away and jumped out of the car. She could not escape, however, as Jerry immediately caught up with her and fell on them from the outside. It did not look like an attack, but after stubborn flirting, a couple who drove along the street noticed that young people were fooling around in the grass and decided to call the police in case they did not intervene themselves, as they were not sure if the girl was in danger. The officers arrived in time to arrest Jerry, and after they had previously received an arrest warrant, they searched his room. They discovered an entire collection of stolen underwear in his hiding place and several intimate photos. After finding the Polaroid photos and the dessous of the neighbor, they immediately linked them to a theft in the neighborhood. But instead of going to jail, Brutos was taken to the Oregon Clinic for psychological examination and involuntary treatment. In conversations with the doctor, Jerry told his fantasies and innermost thoughts that regularly came up in him. The teenager told the doctor that he dreamed of having an underground room where he could hide kidnapped girls. He reported on his special love for women's shoes and looking at indecent photos. Even then, these were warning signs for the psychiatrist. But for some reason, the doctor believed that this was a teenage phase in Jerome's life, and that everything would disappear on its own as soon as the man grew up. The doctors thought the condition was not that serious, so they allowed him to attend school and then return to the clinic. After 9 months of treatment, Jerome was deemed safe for society and released. He returned back to his family and graduated from school and college as an electrician. Since he did not know what to do with himself afterward, he joined the army, but he was not destined to become a soldier. Jerry was discharged from the military after a few months because of his strange obsessions. In the end, he had to return again to the house to his mother, who was not particularly pleased about this turn of events. The woman accepted him as a stranger and brought him into a house in the backyard. Underneath it was an outbuilding that reminded a little of a garage. Over time, he was overwhelmed again by burglaries and theft of lingerie and shoes. One day, he noticed a very active woman in his sleep. He approached quietly from behind her and strangled her neck, and the woman survived but never knew who had attacked her. When Jerome was 23, he met the 17-year-old Ralphie. The young people liked each other. The girl got pregnant, and in the spring of 1992, they married. In the first years of his marriage, Jerry was incredibly happy. They moved to Portland, Oregon, and when their second child was born, Brutos's mother moved into her house to help care for her grandchildren. Ralphine married at a relatively young age, so she did not immediately pay attention to some of her husband's curiosities. For example, he often forced her to only take off her shoes with high heels and pose for photos, or he asked his wife to try on the underwear he had always brought with him from somewhere. Ralphine would later say that she had no idea that the items were stolen. Over the years, the woman became fed up with her husband's weaknesses, and she refrained from his strange photo shoots. Jerry left his fantasies unfulfilled because Ralphine no longer played with him. But then the desire came over him to find new treasures in picking up his collection. He started going out and stalking women. As Brutos was walking around the city one day, he noticed a pretty lady rushing to the bus stop. The man followed her and jumped on the bus with her. He followed the woman to the house and stayed outside to watch through the curtains. Jerry saw the woman had eaten dinner, showering, and getting ready for bed. He waited a little longer after the light in the room had gone out. Then he entered her house, crept quietly to her dresser, and began to carefully open the drawers to find underwear. At some point, Jerome pulled on the box too loudly, and the woman woke up to the noise. She saw the robber and screamed loudly. Then he rushed at her and began to squeeze her throat. As the woman became limp, it triggered a wild desire in her attacker. He took advantage of her helplessness and took possession. After he had enjoyed the quiet, supple body, he snapped. Brutus calmly took his high-heeled shoes and walked away. The woman came to her senses and reported the attack to the police, but the investigators found no evidence of who could have done this, and Jerry felt impunity. His confidence grew with each new attack. It was 1977, and Jerry was 28 years old. He was still married to Ralphine and worked as an electrician in her family's house. There was a basement where the man developed films and kept his trophies. Brutus made this room his personal dark room and prohibited his wife and children from strictly approaching the basement, let alone there. The man spent all his free time in the earth business. Between 1968 and 1969, women began to disappear in Portland. Jerry's first victim was a 19-year-old girl named Linda Slauson from Aloha. She went from door to door selling encyclopedias, and when she arrived at Bruto's house, the man worked in the garden. He expressed interest in buying and lured the girl to get his wallet. While she was looking around, he grabbed her from behind and hit her on the head and cut off the air supply to her lungs. While the girl was dying, Jerry went upstairs to his wife and children. He gave Ralphine money so she could take the children somewhere for dinner, and when he stayed home alone, he went into the basement and started to put on the girl various stolen underwear, photos, and change poses. He played with her like a giant doll, and when he had satisfied all his needs, he wanted to keep part of his performance and withdrew Linda's left leg. Jerry kept the leg in a freezer in the basement, and from time to time he took it out, put on other shoes, and rehearsed it again. That was his muse, so he called it. The evening after he waited for the family to fall asleep, he put Linda's body in the trunk of his car, grabbed an old car part, taped a load, and sank the body of the deceased into the Longton River. Linda Slauson unknowingly discovered a new way for Jerry to find pleasure. He experienced an incredible excitement through his actions. For a while, Brutos satisfied his desires and behaved like an ordinary husband and father. During this time, the family moved to Salem, where they rented a new house with a detached garage. Then Jerome made this room his workplace again. He forbade his wife and children to go there. 10 months went by until he committed his next crime in November 1968. When Brutos came home late at night, he saw a car parked on the side of the road and a girl looking confused under the hood. She was the 33-year-old Jane Whitney from McMinnville. Her car stopped, but she did not understand where the problem lay. For Jerry, this was, of course, a new opportunity to test his power over a weak woman. He volunteered to help, but told her that she first went to his workshop to get some tools. After Jerry convinced Jane that it was unsafe to be alone on the road at this time of day, he invited the girl to get into his car. The man drove into the driveway with the car and ran to get his tools. Satisfied, Jane sat down in the passenger seat and did not even suspect that her life would soon end. Jerry came back, opened the back door of the car, and before the girl had time to remember, he threw a belt around her neck. Then he dragged Jane into the garage and let his perverse imagination run free. He hung the body on a rope and did the most terrible things to her that only came to mind. Jerry kept the body in the garage for about 5 days, and only an absurd accident forced him to finally get rid of the lifeless girl. Jerry, who was in the best mood these days, decided to take his family for a weekend family outing, and while the Brutos family were not at home, there was a traffic accident near their house. The driver lost control, came off the road, and bounced directly against the wall of Jerry's garage. The arriving police quickly inspected the damage to the building. They were lighting with flashlights but did not go into the garage. The criminal was literally on the verge of being exposed. The concerned man hurriedly returned home, waiting until nightfall, and brought the body to the river to throw them away. Jerry got away with his machinations for a long time. He enjoyed hanging out in the garage or just watching attractive women and was always looking for the one who will become the next prey. Karen Sprinkler studied at Oregon University. A 19-year-old student was supposed to meet with her mother for lunch at a department store in downtown Salem on March 27, 1969. But she never appeared. Jerry sneaked up, like always, pushed the girl in the car and took her to his garage. This time, he did not immediately take her life but hung her so that Karen had to stand on tiptoes. Otherwise, she would have died. The man took some photos, enjoyed the young body, and went to the house with his family for dinner. When he came back, the girl showed no more signs of life. She could not stay in the uncomfortable position for long. To leave a memory of a successful hunt, Jerry cut Karen's chest off, painted them with bronze spray paint, and tried to make a real trophy. Then he also got rid of the corpse, threw them into the river, and complained to them with an engine block. After Brutos had tried to kidnap the women twice more, which failed, however, he decided to change the tactics. The man went into a store and bought a fake police badge. As he strolled through the parking lots of shops in Portland, he bowed the passing ladies. One day, he noticed, like a stranger with a bunch of bags, went to her car. It was the 22-year-old Linda Salee. The young woman went to the store to look for a gift for the birthday of her friend, but in addition, bought a few different things and went to load the bags into the car. Jerry realized that this was his chance. He gave himself as a security guard, showed a police ID, and explained to Linda that there had been a number of thefts. He asked her to go to his car to immediately go to the police station and testify there. Instead of going to the police station, he took them to this unfortunate garage. He threatened them with a knife, forced them to undress, and arranged a photo shoot. Afterward, he had fun getting rid of the girl by throwing the body into the river. Linda Ropes became the last victim of Brutos, because on May 10, 1969, a lonely fisherman made the most terrible discovery of his life. Sam Wallace was looking for a fishing spot on the Longt River. On closer inspection, he discovered that it was a human body. Wallace rushed to his car and drove to a nearby gas station to call the police. The deputy sheriff of Benton County rushed to the river. She noticed streaks on the woman's neck. The body itself was tied to a heavy car gearbox with a nylon rope. The police later determined that Linda's body belonged to one of the missing girls. Donus went that there were possibly more bodies nearby and investigated the floor. 2 days later, they found the dead Ken Springer. Girls died as a result of strangulation that infected the corpses indicated that his crime obviously forgot. It was also established that the rope was in an unusual way, and that the rope was tied in an unusual way. The investigators had no idea how to approach this case, and so, given the age of the dead girls, they made their way to college and simply started interviewing female students. After the investigators had spent several days talking to college students and interviewing about 100 girls, they finally found the one which they were looking for. One of the students told of a strange guy who had been hanging around the campus for several days. One day, he started a conversation with her whose topic seemed strange to her, so the girl rushed to leave. Thanks to the description of the student, as well as the testimony of the women the suspect was trying to kidnap, the police found Jerome Brutos. They also learned that the man had been arrested at a young age for assaulting a teenager and had been taken to a hospital in Oregon. The problem was that there was no evidence linking Jerry to the crimes. An investigator expressed a desire to get to know the suspect better to find clues. He found Jerry in his garage when he opened the door. The detective noticed a rope hanging from the ceiling. As Brutos noticed the police officer's interest, he approached the rope and cut a small piece of it. He confidently said he could give him something if he liked the rope. It seems that the criminal himself gave the evidence into the hands of the policeman. But Jerry was daring like most criminals. He sincerely believed that he would never be caught. On the same day, a piece of rope was sent to a forensic expert who confirmed that the nylon cord from the garage and the cord found on the bodies trapped in the river were identical, making it possible to obtain a search warrant for Brutus's car. But when the officers reached Jerry's house, the interior of the car was completely wet. The owner of the car explained that the child had left the windows open when it was in the car wash. The investigators were very upset because all the evidence that could have been in this car was now finally destroyed. The arrival of the police still scared Jerry, and on the same day, he packed his things and made his way to the Canadian border. He was arrested on May 25, 1969. During the interrogation, Brutos, but not for long. This man liked to chat, and eventually he confessed to 4 kidnappings and the massacre of girls. He even told investigators that he tried to electrocute one of them to see what would happen. Jerry's house and garage were searched, and there were numerous photos of women, women's legs, and high-heeled shoes found. In one of the photos behind the girl was a mirror that captured the mirror image of the criminal. This was the final confirmation of the guilt of Jerry Brutos. The perpetrator received for each girl 3 consecutive life sentences. Linda Slauson's body was never found, so they couldn't blame him. Jerome Brutos was imprisoned for 37 years by Salem and died in March 2006 at the age of 67 of an incurable disease. His wife divorced him in 1970 and left the state with 2 children. Since then, she changed her name as she did not want to remember her family life and tried to protect the children. Wilma Cruz Pinedo was born in 1992 in the city of Huánuco in northern Peru. She grew up in a large family with 8 children. When she turned 20 in 2012, she decided to move to Lima, the capital of the country. Her family lived in a rural area, so Wilma thought it would be better to move to the city to find work and support them financially. She sent all the money she earned as a maid in Lima to her parents to use for her younger siblings' education. Wilma had many dreams for her family. She brought her parents to tears many times and also returned to her hometown to bring them gifts and money. She had dreams and wishes not only for her family, but also for her personal life. She always dreamed of becoming a singer. According to her parents, she had wanted to be on stage since she was a child. To realize this dream, Wilma attended a music school in central Lima in 2015. According to her teachers, she had a bright future ahead because she had a very good voice, was charismatic on stage, and was very diligent. They said that Wilma had clear goals and always kept them in mind, thinking that her triumph on the Peruvian stage was likely imminent. While studying and working, she had time to communicate on a social network where she met a man named Franklin. Initially, Franklin was interested in communicating with Wilma's cousin, but after meeting Wilma, he decided to keep in touch with her instead. After some time, they started dating and began a romantic relationship. Franklin was so close to Wilma that he attended the same school as her, but he studied keyboard and eventually wanted to become a musician. According to friends of the couple, Franklin was a very calm and focused person who would never hurt anyone. It seemed that Wilma had reached all the goals in her life. She was able to financially support her loved ones, was preparing to become an artist, and had found love. However, on October 11, 2017, her dreams and illusions disappeared forever. That morning, she went to work as usual, and at 6 p.m., after completing all her errands, she planned to meet Franklin according to one of her brothers who lived with her in Lima. They were supposed to pick up photos from a photo shoot Wilma had participated in a few weeks earlier. The late evening came, and Wilma still did not appear. Friends and family began to call Franklin because he was the last person she was with, and because he was also her boyfriend. However, he denied having been with her that day. Initially, he told her family that he had not seen her that morning or afternoon, and that they had not spoken that day, which was very strange because Wilma never lied about where she was. At this point, the employer of the girl, who was also very concerned, called the woman who had taken Wilma's photos and asked if she had come for the photos. It was already the next day, October 12, 2017. The photographer told the relatives that Wilma had indeed come around 11 p.m., but not alone. She was accompanied by Franklin, who was known to the photographer because he was the one who paid for the photo shoot. She said they had taken the photos and then left together in a taxi. This was the reason for the family's suspicion towards Franklin, as the photographer's version did not match his at all. In the end, he admitted that he had been with Wilma that evening, but initially denied it because he had been a bit nervous since the girl had not come home. However, he then told a completely different story than his family believed. Franklin said that after taking the photos, he said goodbye to Wilma at the plaza and called a taxi to go home, while the girl decided to walk. It should be noted that it was about midnight when Franklin, according to his story, left Wilma at the plaza. The relatives of the missing girl found this very strange, as it is not normal to leave a girl almost at midnight alone in the plaza. Therefore, they began to scrutinize Franklin more closely and monitor each of his actions. During the search for Wilma, another detail emerged. One of her cousins mentioned that the girl had received threats from an unidentifiable number a few days earlier. It was an anonymous number that informed her that she did not know who she was contacting, that the person sending the messages was a very important person, and a long list of other threats. So, there were two lines from relatives. Either Franklin was responsible for her disappearance, or the person who was threatening her. Each time they tried to call the police for help, they were told to wait, because Wilma had probably gone away with a man she had met and was most likely elsewhere. Therefore, the family decided to start searching for the girl independently. They hung posters with her photo on almost every street in the city, asked people if they had seen her, and also went to places where she used to hang out to see if she was there. But all this helped nothing, and months passed without any news from Wilma. As a result, 2017 ended without any news about the girl. The last time Wilma was seen, or had any indication that she was alive, was when a surveillance camera from a store near the house where she worked captured her at 6 p.m. leaving the store. You can see the girl looking into the camera, and then a camera nearby films her from behind as she walks down the street alone. This was the only proof that Wilma was outside that day, but it was not conclusive because it was near her workplace. Only in January 201K did the investigations move forward, but not in the form hoped for by Wilma's family. KM from Paso, on a stretch of road that served as a thoroughfare, a suitcase was found on January 8, 2018. A couple stopped there to take photos against the background of a beautiful sunset. Then the smell of decay began to attract their attention, and as they followed the smell, they saw a suitcase. Before opening the suitcase, which looked old and dusty, they decided to call the police. Security officers who arrived at the scene opened the suitcase and were shocked. Inside, they found the body of a young woman. Since the discovery was so shocking, various speculations appeared in the media. Initially, it was said that a burnt body had been found in the suitcase, but the authorities later denied this, stating that the body was in a state of strong decay. It is assumed that the body had been there for about 2 months. They established this hypothesis because they examined the insects found in the suitcase and thus had an idea of when the body might have been left there. It was also known that the body belonged to a woman between the ages of 25 and 35. At this time, there were many cases of missing women with these characteristics in Lima, so identification was very difficult. However, with the help of fingerprints, it was still determined that the found body belonged to Wilma Cruz. To be absolutely sure, besides fingerprints, other methods of identity confirmation were used. Before her disappearance, Wilma had gone to the dentist to have a tooth removed, and this tooth was also missing. In addition, she had suffered a collarbone fracture as a teenager, which was also visible on this body. In the end, a DNA test was performed to confirm the identity, which turned out positive. Now the officers had to find out what had happened to the young woman, how long she had been there, and most importantly, who had done it. A thorough autopsy was not possible due to the state of decay, so it was assumed that the main cause of death was suffocation. However, there was no way to determine this at that time. A toxicological test was also performed, and it was found that Wilma was neither drunk nor under the influence of illegal substances at the time of her death. Then the investigations into the murder of the girl began, and as usual, they started with her partner, Franklin. During the months-long search for Wilma, the police became very suspicious of the man who did not cooperate in any way with everything that was done. He did not participate in her search and continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. Also, his alibi began to crumble. Franklin said he had spent the night of October 11th at the house of one of his friends, but this friend stated that he had not even seen the man that day. The police began to consider him the main suspect. The officers could access his text messages and social media posts, which showed that he had arranged to meet Wilma that day. They also checked the cameras at the plaza where he supposedly left the girl, and none of them showed that the couple was there at all. Days after the discovery of the body and 1 day after the identification, Franklin was arrested as the only suspect in Wilma's death. In his first statements after his arrest, the man said he did not know what had happened to the girl, he had no idea what she had been through, and he was completely innocent. But the police began to corner him, showing him messages, phone calls, and the statement of his friend that he had not been there that evening, and little by little, the man broke down. Wilma's family and friends said that whenever they asked Franklin about her, he was always very nervous. We must also remember that he first said he had not seen her, and a few hours later, he said he had been with her. The photographer who took the girl's photo also told the police that the man had threatened her a few days after the disappearance and said she should not talk about him coming with Wilma, because if she did not reappear, it would all be his fault. In the end, after all this, Franklin had no choice but to admit his guilt. He said that he had killed Wilma on October 11th, 2017. They had arranged to meet around 7 p.m., then they spent some time together, talked a little, went for a walk, and then took a taxi to take photos, went to the photographer's house, looked at the work, liked it very much, and left there happily. In the taxi, Franklin invited Wilma to come to his house. She agreed, and both went to the room he had rented in a 3-story house. Then they began to call the girl on her phone, which Franklin did not particularly like. According to him, Wilma did not answer calls, but sent text messages, and he also saw that she was sending several messages on social networks. Franklin said that at that time he became very jealous, yelled at Wilma, and that the argument then turned into a fight. To defend herself, she hit him in the face, after which the man got angry, grabbed her by the neck, and began to choke her. According to his statements, he remained in this position for about 2 minutes, until he realized that the young woman was no longer alive. When he realized what he had done, he took a suitcase he had at home and put Wilma's body in it. Franklin then called a friend named Oscar, who was a taxi driver, and asked him to help him take his suitcase to a deserted place. The man says that the taxi driver knew about the suitcase but did not know what was inside. Franklin paid Oscar 300 Peruvian soles for the trip and went to a very remote area where the suitcase was found and hid it in a place where he believed it would never be found. He did not suspect that a few months later, a young couple looking for the perfect place for a photo shoot would stumble upon it. After Franklin left the suitcase at this place, he returned to the taxi, went home, and continued to live as usual. He was asked if he regretted his deed, and he answered that this was not the case. There was a reconstruction of the events in which Franklin had apparently been involved, and various tests were conducted, including a luminol test in the man's room, which showed various bloodstains, so it is assumed that Franklin had beaten Wilma very brutally before choking her. After all the processes, the court in Lima in September 2019 sentenced this man. Wilma's family requested a life sentence. They talked about it in many media outlets and made it clear that they wanted this man to spend the rest of his days in prison. However, it turned out that the opposite was the case. The man was found guilty, but only had to spend 18 years in prison and pay compensation to his family. Franklin took Wilma's life because he felt that she belonged to him. He stole her dreams, took Wilma's parents' daughter away from her siblings, the person who had helped them move forward. Ultimately, Wilma was the breadwinner of her family and the one who helped them survive. Franklin said he did not regret what he had done. Many believed that he had been planning this for some time, and the psychological profile presented in court showed that he was a possessive and very calculating person. It is also known that Franklin had shown some signs of violence towards his ex-girlfriends. Before society, however, he always pretended to be a very calm person. Those who knew him believed that he would not hurt a fly, but it turned out that this was not the case.